Hi, my name's Dean Barlow. Today you join me at the wonderful Meadowlands Fishery in Warwickshire to do a spot of winter feeder fishing. As you'd expect, winter feeder fishing is totally different from the summer months, where the decisions that you make can have a great impact on your finished catch. Whether you're fishing in the winter or the summer, it's always important to have a plan. But during the winter months, you must be prepared to just deviate off that plan slightly, just to make sure you get the most out of the fish that are feeding. So with these winter sessions, it's always important to know what species you're targeting. In this lake behind me, Lambsdown, there's a brilliant head of skimmers, roach and some lovely perch. So the plan we make today, we have to include all those species if we want to make the best out of a winter's day's fishing. Hidden talents from fishermen. Number 1, Dean Barlow. Playing the saw. Thank you very much. So winter feeder sessions, ground bait is so important. And one thing that I do like to do is have a look at the conditions of the water before I choose what ground bait I'm going to use. Today at Meadowlands, the water is pretty clear, so I would like to use a dark ground bait. The main reason why I like a dark ground bait on a clear lake is because it gives the fish confidence to sit on the bottom. If I was to use a really light coloured ground bait, it doesn't look very natural on the bottom. A dark ground bait will mingle in with the silt and the fish will not be preoccupied in looking for something that they might be scared of. I'm just going to use 1 part ground expander. It goes in there. And with the lake being so clear, I'm going to use a dark ground bait as well. And with this case, I'm going to use 1.5 parts. Another great tip on this winter feeder fishing is before you actually mix your ground bait, I do like to put it through a very fine riddle, which will keep all the big bits that might fill the fish up out of the mix completely. The reason for doing this is I do believe that fish are so finicky in the winter time, and I want them feeding on the baits that I choose to put in and not what's already in the ground bait. The way I mix my ground bait in winter is totally different to how I do it in the summertime. In the summer you can put plenty of water in it and the summer air will dry it out so you can add more water as you go. But in the winter months, when it's a lot cooler, I like to add the water little and often and even go back to it 2 or 3 times just to make sure that I get the right consistency. So the rig I like to use during the winter is a rig that we call braid straight through. It does incorporate a braided leader. I'm going for the 017 bait up braid as my leader, 010 acolyte braid on the reel. It couldn't be as simple. Overhand loop onto the main braid, and then for your leader just a half blood knot, 5-turn blood knot down. Nice and simple, pull it tight, trim off the tags, and you've got the perfect shock leader knot. But why do we use braid straight through? Many years ago, when we first started using braided lines, we used to use monofilament shock leaders. But by using braided leaders, everything is so clean, it's so direct, your feeders actually land better and they evacuate the bait a lot better as well. So as you can see with this, I'm just winding it up my rod and I'm going to put the leader knot, as you can see, just onto the reel. So when I cast, there's 2 or 3 turns onto the reel, and when I'm playing fish, I'm playing it on the leader. So I'm going to cut that off there. Some people ask, is it too direct when you're playing fish? The kind of rods that we've got now, fishing tackle is better than it ever has been. We can get softer rods which alleviate hook pulls. Today I'm using a 10-foot F1 in silvers, which does exactly as it says on the tin. Perfect for small silver fish, and in case you incorporate the odd big fish, you've got no problems at all. To keep with the sensitivity, I'm using a braided feeder link, which means that will sit in the water. If your line moves, you won't feel any resistance on the feeder at all because the braided link is so supple, really supple. So the fish, when they pull, they can't feel the feeder. In the summer, I'll probably use a stiffer boom where the fish are more active and you want a kind of bolt effect. So I just put that up onto the leader, and then the last part of the rig is the most important. it's the boom. For this, I'm using 10-pound Acolyte fluorocarbon. And again, I like to keep things very simple. Link up the line and then a 4-turn water knot to attach the braid to the fluorocarbon. Probably one of the oldest knots we've ever used in fishing, but one that's probably not used half as much as we used to. I like to lubricate that really well. Pull all 4 ends tight, and then we just need to trim those off. On the fluorocarbon trim, I like to leave a couple of millimeters, so that stops the link from going over the knot, and then I like the braided end nice and tight. And then to complement that, I like to have about 7 or 8 inches of boom, which again I will tie a small loop in. The loop tire. Again, trim off this one quite close. Which in turn your hook length will fit onto. That is the perfect winter rig. Frequently asked question on feeder fishing is quiver tip choice. I have a few basic rules that I like to implement on my sessions, whether it be winter or summer. First of all, I always try to use the lightest quiver tip that I can get. For the main reason is it's better at bite detection, but it also shows you what's going off in the peg. Whether you get little liners or there's fish in your peg and you can't catch them, that tells me that I need to change something to make sure that the fish are eating the bait. But there has to be a compromise. As today at Meadowlands, we've got a big crosswind going off, which creates a lot of tow. So before my session starts, I always give myself a little bit of extra time after plumbing up just to see what the tow is like on the lake. As you can see here, the tip is bent right round because of the tow. Immediately, I will go up the bank and put a heavier tip in. Don't be afraid to change. Float anglers and pole anglers, they take in a rare floats and rigs to suit the conditions. Your quiver tips are more or less the same as that for feeder fishing. So I've just come back to the ground bait, and in the time it's took me to set up, it's dried out considerably. Again, like I said previously, I'd rather keep adding water than to put too much water in and spoil the ground bait. So this time, just a couple of little handfuls of water. Again, vigorous stir around. And what I'm looking for is to get it back to that consistency where I can make the ball and then it gently flakes back to powder. I've just cast out for the first time and I've got a basic plan. Knowing Meadowlands like I do know that most of the fish will be caught on a shorter line where it's much deeper. When I plumbed up, most of the depth is between the bank and 15 to 16 metres. I've opted to fish at 14 metres on a short line where I've put 3 or 4 larger feeder falls in. I want that to be rested so the fish can get confidence and feed there later on. But in the meantime, I'm casting out to 24 metres where it's a little bit shallower. I've only put a couple of small feeder falls out just to start, and my aim is to see what's actually feeding. If I start catching skimmers out long, I'll know that I can fish with different kinds of baits, with different kind of feeders. But at this moment in time, I'm just getting a feel for what's actually feeding. I've just had a couple of little plucks there, which probably says to me that there's a few roach feeding. So at this moment in time, all I'm doing is just seeing what's feeding in the swim. Started off on the longer line on a 4-hole cage feeder. It's a bullet style cage feeder, which enables me to cast nice and straight in this crosswind. The cage feeder will let a little bit of bait travelling down to the bottom, just to let the fish know that there's something on the bottom and they can follow it down. As always, a stopwatch is absolutely vital in winter. There will be a pattern form where you do get your bites. There's always a window of however it is. It might be 3 to 4 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes. If your bite's coming at a certain time, say for instance it's every 5 minutes, there's no point leaving it in there for 10. So stopwatch is absolutely vital. So what baits have I bought today? Because I'm not 100% sure what fish we'll be feeding, I've bought a little bit of everything. I've got live maggots and live pinkies in case I'm fishing more for roach or perch, and I've also got dead pinkies and dead maggots if it's a skimmer kind of day. I've also got a few casters and a few worms. Worms are a funny bait in winter. I don't like to put any in at the start. They can have a real adverse effect, but on some occasions you can put worms in, it totally transforms it. So it's one of those 50-50 baits that I'd rather put in later on in the session and to see if it can spark some life into the peg. When you've got a crosswind, it's so important as soon as your feeder lands is to get the tip under the water and make sure that your braid gets nice and wet and sinks. Otherwise you could end up with a real big bow between your feeder and your quiver tip, and that could miss out on those all important little signs on the tip. There we go, absolutely brilliant, just on cue. As I mentioned, I just moved that feeder just a tiny little bit, and often it can pay dividends. I'm not sure whether it moves the hook bait, I just think it kicks up the bottom and it just makes those inquisitive fish have a little look. I'm interested to see what it is, and it is a roach. Not a bad start on a winter's day. So that was on a dead maggot and a dead pinky. Now if I'm fishing for roach, I really like to use the live maggots. So seeing I've just caught a roach, I'm going to put a live maggot on and a live pinky. And that cast before, I just over wetted my ground bait slightly, just to try and make a little bit more cloud going down. So I'm going to try that again. So important to wipe off the feeder. With it being a cage, some little bits will come off as it goes down, but I'm in control of what actually comes off the feeder. So I'm going to cast that out again. I'll look at my stopwatch. There's 6 minutes on the stopwatch, about a minute to play the fish in, so 5 minutes was the time. Seems like the slightly wetted ground bait is doing the trick. That's only been in the water 25 seconds and a fish has took it on the drop. Quite interested to see what this fish is. Don't think it's foul looked. The bite was nice and positive. It'd be very interesting to see what it is. Beautiful bend in the rod. Definitely no chance of the hook pulling out, that's for sure. Oh, that is, it's one of my favourite fish of all time. It is a fish that loves feeding up in the water, an absolute perfect hybrid. One of my favourite fish and always welcome on a cold day. Let's slip this into the net. With the fishing being quite varied and you never know what species you're fishing for, I don't like to put all my eggs in one basket with my ground bait. If you look at my tub, half of it is on the damp side and half of it is still dry. It means that I can mix the two to try and deliver what the fish are feeding on. Sometimes I might be having 2 or 3 casts with really wet ground bait, but I feel like the fish might be coming too far up in the water. So I need to tone it down a little bit, which means I can put a little bit of dry and mix it into the damper ground bait to get the consistency a tiny little bit stiffer. Consistency is always key to all your feeder fishing, whether it's in the winter or the summer. I've just dropped in on my shorter line, which I'd prepared from the start of the session. Sport was slowing down and I just had this feeling the fish are going to come a bit shorter in the deeper water. So this on the second chuck. First cast resulted in a roach and another one this cast as well. Again, the subtle changes of trying to find out where the fish are feeding is paying dividends. And another beautiful roach. Let's get back and get another one. Oh, that's amazing, isn't it? Look at him, he loves being on the camera, doesn't he? Feeder choice is a broad subject. On my winter sessions, I like to simplify it by just bringing one or two of the ones that I think that will produce best on the day. Many different types. You've got your traditional side-weighted cage, you've got your bullet style cage, you've got the window feeder, and another one that I do like to choose is a very small bullet. These have got little tiny weights on the bottom. If the water has no ripple and it's very flat, these just don't make any sound as they go in. So my rule of thumb is I take 4 feeders with me. One thing that's made a massive difference to today's session is once I'd realised that the skimmers that frequent this lake aren't actually feeding today and it was going to be a roach day, I changed down my hook. I went to a smaller hook and a thinner line. From my experience, roach definitely like a bit better presentation than skimmers. So definitely a tip for the future, if you are targeting roach, smaller hooks and finer line is definitely a positive. Cage feed is probably one of the most popular feeders on the market, but why is it so good? A cage feeder, you can put any kind of ground bait you want in there. They're good for any kind of species of fish. You can put wet ground bait in there if you need to leave a trail, or you can put drier ground bait in there if you want to get it to the bottom. They're the best all-round feeder on the market. We've come to the end of the session. As in winter, light is not on our side, but we've had an absolutely brilliant session. We started off thinking that the skimmers in this fabulous lake was going to feed, but it's ended up being a bit of a roach session. So I hope that the changes and tips that we've made will help you put more fish in your net.